Hello everyone and welcome to a special LSJ late review. My name's Luke and today something different, something special, I hope. I'm going to do 3 movies today. Yeah, a trilogy of horror flicks, 2 directed in the 80s, 1 in the early thousands, and we've got Re-Animator, Bride of Re-Animator, and Beyond Re-Animator. Now, just a word of warning here. There's going to be some spoilers. It's not going to be too spoilerific, but in order for me to talk about Bride of Re-Animator and Beyond Re-Animator, some things are going to be spoiled from one movie to the next. If that kind of thing bothers you, you've been warned. But they're kind of mild. I won't be doing too much of a deep dive into the stories for each because, well, we'll get into that. So, without further ado, let us do our first flick, which is Re-Animator. So Re-Animator is directed by a man named Stuart Gordon, and it came out in 1985, and it stars Jeffrey Combs, Dan Abbott. We've got, fucking awesome Barbara Crampton, and then we've got David Gale as well. None of them are really big names, at least to me, except for maybe Jeffrey Combs. So it's weird to see him in something without makeup, actually, because I'm used to seeing him pop up in various Star Trek shows in his gear. So what is Re-Animator? Well, apart from it being my second H.P. Lovecraft adaptation, the first being The Color Out of Space, this is about a man named Herbert West, basically, who is doing experiments in reanimating the dead. And he's having some pretty good results. But unfortunately for him and for everyone around him, the reanimation serum usually turns bodies and people into kind of zombies, I guess, for lack of a better term. I'd never seen these before. Big reason why. Needles freak me the fuck out. But I've always been curious, and my curiosity got the better of me all the way in 2020. So it took me a while, but here I am, getting into these films. Yeah, I don't like needles that much. Here's Jeffrey Combs on the poster with a needle, and I'm just like, oh, pass. I'm glad I finally took the chance to watch this flick because, alright, there's a Hans Gruber in this. That predates the Hans Gruber we all know. I just want to get that out of the way, but there's a lot of charm to this movie, even though it is fucking disgusting. It is fucking hilarious. It's disgusting. It's horrific. It's all of these things. But there is a charm to it. There is a tone that, even when things are getting completely fucking insane, that it's always fun, which is what I like. The makeup effects hold up too. I'm just going to say that right now. Most of them do. One of the characters becomes a disembodied head, and the head's alive, and then the body's coming around. That looks fucking phenomenal. All of the zombies and makeup and gore effects are pretty spot on. And maybe the creative direction, like the real show stealer here is Jeffrey Combs as the callous, amoral motherfucker, Dr. Herbert West. You never get the sense that he's evil. He just doesn't give a shit about anything or anyone except doing his experiments. And if you step up to him, he's going to kill you, and then he's going to experiment on you and put the reanimator serum in, and shenanigans is going to happen. I really got, maybe not quite the same way, but I really got an Evil Dead 2 vibe from Re-Animator. That kind of like insanity, because as this movie builds, it builds up to this really fucking insane climax in a hospital morgue, and it's kind of got these weird, insane, like Evil Dead 2 vibes. If you've seen Evil Dead 2 and Re-Animator, you might know what I mean when I say that. There's some really fun characters in this movie. One of them being the worst security guard I've ever seen. just chilling back, reading magazines, or on his way to the men's room to rub one out. Yeah, seriously, uh, he's about as good at keeping an eye. He's no good at keeping an eye on the comings and goings, but every scene he's in, he's fucking hilarious. Now you got Barbara Crampton as Megan Halsey. Very tough role for her because there is nudity in it, but there is one scene in particular involving a disembodied head and oral sex. I'll leave it at that. Doesn't quite go as far as you'd think, but it straddles that line pretty fucking close. And you're just like, whoa, what the fuck? Some other good characters. You've got Dan Abbott as Dr. Dan Kane. He's more the likable protagonist hero type that you can kind of get behind and root for. He's got the relationship going on with Megan. He gets roped into being the assistant to Herbert West in his machinations and experiments and shit. And the acting's pretty solid. There's no real bad acting, but it is an 80s horror flick, so, just so you know what to expect there. I just want to point out, though, one thing that lets this movie down for me, and it's the music. I'm sorry, I don't like Richard Band's music at all. It's fucking awful, annoying, and I would have rathered a movie with no score than the score that this movie had. I'm sorry. There it is. But at the end of the day, despite the music, which can get really grating if you're a music guy and love music, I'm not a big music guy. I love listening to music, I should say, but the music in this is just annoying and kind of basic sounding. And the theme to this movie is a rip-off of Psycho. It's changed just enough not to be Psycho, but you listen to it and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's Psycho. That aside, this is a really fun movie. It's a fucking good time. If you're squeamish, you might want to skip it. But I'm going to give Re-Animator an 8 out of 10. I reckon you should go and seek it out and give it a watch. Welcome. Here's the second movie. It's Bride of Re-Animator. And so Bride of Re-Animator is a 1989 horror flick directed by Brian Yuzna. Sorry if I got that wrong, the pronunciation of the surname there. Now, Brian produced the first movie. Here he is taking over directorial duties here. Also, we've got Jeffrey Combs, Bruce Abbott, and also David Gale coming back as Herbert West, Dan Kane, and Dr. Carl Hill. Dr. Carl Hill is not an character I expected to return, but I'm glad he did. You're in for a wild ride when his disembodied head is the first thing you see floating up. So, yep, there's a mild spoiler there. So his character ends up being that disembodied head we talked about earlier. He was a sleazy old man in the first movie. Really preyed upon Barbara Crampton's character. And here, he's no less evil or wicked, except now he doesn't have his body. He's just a head. The general gist of this movie is West and Kane, they travel back home after spending 8 months in South America doing some experiments in a civil war or something like that in South America. And they just travel back home 8 months later to resume pretty much where they left off. Even using the same hospital and everything, even though there was a massacre there, there was fucking like the dean of it was a student hospital. The dean was killed. One of their prior surgeons was decapitated. All these kinds of things. And yet they go back to this hospital in the same town 8 months after the events. And the cops aren't really after them straight away. There's one cop after them in this movie, and he's a mega creep, but otherwise, no, there's no real big manhunt or anything like that. Also, Herbert West at the end of the first movie, like, you're not sure if he lived or died, and unless I didn't watch things closely enough, there's no explanation for how Dr. Herbert West survived the first movie. None. Just go with it. And so there's a lot of elements that are the same, and that's a shame because I feel like you could do some different things with this kind of franchise, but I feel like the second movie copies a lot of plot from the first one. Dan Abbott has another love interest in this movie, which plays out in a similar fashion. You've got a big massacre kind of insane ending. This time it doesn't take place in a hospital. This time near a crypt. But it's essentially the same kind of deal. You've got a lot of the same plot elements, almost beat for beat. And that kind of bothered me a lot. And because that bothered me a lot, another thing that bothered me from the first movie bothered me twice as much here, and that's Richard fucking Band's music. It's doubly awful in the second one. I didn't notice it's as bad in the first movie because I was just so in on Re-Animator. It was such a fucking cool flick. Second movie is sort of cool, but you've seen almost all of it before. There's some interesting shit, like some visuals, like the disembodied head gets like bat wings and shit and flies around. There's all sorts of crazy insanity. So you'll watch Bride of Re-Animator and think, wow, this is super samey, but they up the insanity level in the last part of the movie. And I think they come close to topping it, but they don't quite top the first movie. They don't really expand on much in terms of lore or anything like that either. It's pretty much a retread, which is a shame. As I said, you could do so much more. So it pains me. It pains me to do this because, like, all right, you're thinking low score here, but it's still a solid, entertaining time. These movies are all hour and a half. This is still a solid, entertaining, fun film. Almost everyone who's watched this flick watched Re-Animator first, right? And come on, we know they're essentially the same movie. There's differences, sure, but not enough for me to really think this is an interesting new direction or anything like that. So I'll give it a 6. It's kind of average, but it really tries. It's pretty ambitious. I like the end, and yeah. So if you like the first one, I think you might like the second one, but don't go in there expecting like the horror equivalent of The Godfather Part 2 or Aliens or anything like that. But more of the same. And sometimes you want more of the same. That's fine. Here we are, the last flick. It is Beyond Re-Animator. Beyond Re-Animator is a 2003 horror flick directed once again by Brian Yuzna. And the only recurring character this time is Dr. Herbert West. The general gist, when I tell you the storyline of this, it's going to sound pretty different. But it's also very formulaic and similar at the same time. So the movie starts with more reanimated shenanigans happening, and at the end this time Herbert West gets arrested and sent to prison. It cuts to 13 years later and he's still in there, and the boy who kind of eyeballs him as he's being taken away from the cops, he just lost his sister to a reanimated zombie, and he eventually becomes a doctor, and he wants to work in this prison so he can work with Herbert West and start up again the reanimation experiments. So they do, with hilarious and horrific results. Now, I just want to say, this movie also has too much similarities to the first one. Like, I feel like you could try different things. This one tries something new with a different setting, a different group of characters and all that. But you've still got his doctor assistant who's reluctant, just like Dan Kane was. Oh, I don't want to help you. All right, I'll help you. So here he is. Here is this new guy helping him, and he's got a love interest too, and that works out just about as good as it did in the first two fucking movies. You've got the prison warden who turns out to be another Carl Hill, really sleazy towards women, just an evil warden prick motherfucker. You've got some cliched prison types here as well, and what you also have is a lot of really bad acting. Alright, so the first two movies we're never going to win Oscars or whatever, and that's fine. But the acting's really solid in both those flicks. There's no performances that really bring it down. It's always an enjoyable good time. I will say this movie's an enjoyable good time, but a different kind, because some of the acting and dialogue is so fucking awful. Jeffrey Combs sells it. He makes everything in this movie involving him fucking work. He is absolutely amazing in not only Beyond Re-Animator, but also the entire trilogy. He's the man to watch. He is so much fucking fun. He is as amoral and callous as ever, but I think maybe a little more funnier than in this outing. One good thing, there was a few good things about this movie, so don't get me wrong, but one thing that I was just like, yes, thank you, yes! Richard Band does not do the music. So immediately, I'm like, fuck yeah. This is a guy named Xavier Capellas. His music is so much better. So much better. In fact, it feels like he uses more than one instrument as well. So, wow, awesome, thank you. Fantastic. I really enjoyed the music. It's nothing mind-blowing or life-changing. I don't think I'd ever seek out the soundtrack online or anything like that. But compared to the previous two movies, the music in this one is fantastic. Some really funny characters in this as well. Despite the acting, you've got a prison guard who doesn't know what the word devious means. So he uses it on a prisoner like someone would use the word dumbass, which I found funny. There's some pretty funny lines, but there's a lot of corny crap dialogue here too. Another interesting thing is they do a little more with the reanimation lore. They add little bits to it, which I think is interesting and works in some really horrific but comedic ways. There's not just the reanimation stuff in the back of the spine now, but he can take, say the life force of an animal or a human and then put that into some dead tissue and it kind of becomes alive again. Not dead alive, but alive. I know how that sounds, but yeah. And one of the characters, he gets killed by West, and rather than bring him back normally or anything like that, he's like, this guy's a piece of shit. I'm gonna reanimate him, and then I'm gonna put this kind of like life essence of a rat inside him, and for the rest of the movie, like the warden's got the teeth and he's got the movements of this kind of rat and he slinks around and shit. Even though he's still got this walking stick he just whacks people with. I found that really creative and fun. There's, of course, if you set a movie up like this in a prison, there's going to be some form of riot or something like that. And yes, that does happen. And that happens as well as a mixture of all these kind of people getting injected. You see what happens when someone who's not dead injects themselves with the serum too, which is fucking funny. What makes me enjoy this movie despite the fucking really bad dialogue and so many of the elements from being the same from the first two movies though, is maybe the last half hour. That just kind of insanity and craziness was really worth it. I think we got to this point, I'm like, all right, here's the climax, let's go, let her rip. And they let rip. It looks fucking awesome. It's funny, it's horrific. The endings of these movies are usually pretty good. I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but West dies at the end of the second movie, right? Again, seemingly. No explanation for how he's alive. And so at the end of this movie, I'm waiting for it. I'm like, all right, how's he going to get trapped or whatever, so you think he's dead or something like that. Nope, he's fine. He lives. So, yeah, that was something. There's not enough new. Second movie is kind of a clone of the first. And the third movie is pretty much like just a reskinned Re-Animator. I'm pretty sure they can take this in weird, crazy new directions that don't have West having a kind of whiny assistant that always has a love interest, that always gets killed somehow in some way. I'm sure there's a way you can have a Re-Animator movie without that element. just concentrate on Herbert West doing his experiments, maybe getting out of hand like that. I don't know. You don't really need that 3 movies in a row. I feel like you can get away from that and do something different. So I would say, in terms of gore and effects and endings of the films, they will take risks and they'll do weird, crazy shit that really goes, oh wow, it makes you really go, wow, wow, yes, more of this. But there's also too much of the same. And whilst the ending of this and Jeffrey Combs kind of elevated this up, for me, there's too many shortcomings here. But it's not a low score. It is, though, another 6 out of 10. Which one's your favourite? Mine's Re-Animator. I gave it an 8 out of 10. It's something I think I can watch often. You know, it's something I can put on and enjoy all the time. It's witty, it's clever, it's fantastic. The second two, maybe I'd check them out once in a while, but nowhere near as much, if at all. And that's all right. Jeffrey Combs is fantastic in all 3. And despite my average ratings for the second and third installments, I'd really like to see another one. Maybe because I just like seeing Jeffrey Combs play Dr. Herbert West so much. He is delightful. So there it is. 3 movies, 1 video. There we go. So it's a bit of a longer one here, but I think I covered a little bit more ground. Not sure if I'll do more in this kind of format, or maybe I'll just do them in group a couple. I'm thinking of doing another horror franchise, so I wonder if I should just do all of them in one or just break them up a bit. Because most horror franchises have a few more than 3. 3 was easy to manage here. I hope you liked it. Thanks for sticking with me for this long. Give me a like, dislike, share, subscribe, all that crap. My Twitter is down below. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.